Hello and welcome to this episode of sMater, a podcast by clinicians for clinicians, brought to you by Mater, an Australian leader in healthcare for more than a century. My name's Gillian Whiting.
And I'm Catherine Cooper, Clinical Specialty Coordinator for Mothers, Babies and Women's Health at Mater.
And we're coming to you from Meanjin, the land on which this podcast is being recorded. Today we are joined by Kathleen Goldsmith, Assistant Director, Clinical Services, Birthing and Ambulatory at Mater Mothers Hospitals.
Kathleen is a nurse, midwife and lactation consultant with more than 25 years' experience. In addition to her role, Kathleen is Mater's midwifery lead for the Safer Baby Bundle and the Preterm Birth Prevention Collaborative.
And if that's not enough, she's also in the process of completing a Masters of Clinical Redesign.
Today, she's joining us to talk about the Preterm Birth Prevention Collaborative.
Mater.
Caring for the community for more than a century.
Innovators in health, education and research.
Home to world-class clinicians.
State-of-the-art facilities.
High quality, patient-centered
Australia's largest and leading
Turning
maternity
scientific
provider.
discoveries
Educating the
into
nurses,
life-changing
healthcare
outcomes.
advancements,
compassion and integrity.
We are Mater.
We are Mater.
We are Mater.
This is sMater.
Kathleen, welcome to sMater.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've heard about the Preterm Birth Prevention Collaborative referred to a few times during this series. We're really keen to know more about it. So can you tell us what is it and why is Mater involved?
Sure. So the Preterm Birth Prevention Collaborative is a collaborative federal funding project with Women's Healthcare Australasia, the Preterm Birth Prevention Alliance, IHI and Safer Care Victoria, along with over 50 sites across Australia that are all working towards the goal to reduce preterm birth by 20% by 2024.
And why is it important for Mater to be involved?
We know that 1 in 10 babies can be born prematurely. We have not seen a reduction in those preterm birth rates for many decades. We know that globally it is a health concern for all families, and certainly it's a concern to us that we see around 8% of our babies here at Mothers born preterm, and we want to do something about it.
It sounds a fantastic idea, all those hospitals working together. How does it actually work, Kathleen?
Yeah, so all of the sites come together every quarter and we move around the country. So we've been to Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, and in the new year we'll meet in Canberra together for the final collaborative. So all the teams go off to their local hospitals and they put all of the strategies in place and do improvement methodology frameworks to ensure that they can drive change. And then we come together every quarter to share our learnings and to look at the research and look at the outcomes and compare our data. So it's a very wonderful way for us to collaborate together to meet a common goal.
So who is involved in the collaborative, Kathleen, within a hospital?
Yeah, so these big projects, it's really important that we have a multidisciplinary approach. I would say the most important person in our collaborative group here at Mater Mothers Hospital is our consumer, Sophie. Sophie has just brought such a beautiful insight into how we're thinking about this and really getting us out of our lingo and our medical speak and our bias to really think about how this is impacting women and families. And that's been a really wonderful journey to be on with Sophie. We also know that we need midwifery input, we need maternal fetal medicine input, we need obstetric input, and we need our future leaders in our midwifery team. So we've brought some really wonderful dynamic midwives into the team as well.
We need influencers, don't we? People who can actually get this happening on the ground level.
And they're midwives that are working in our clinics, that are attending education and are reminding people to complete their audits and document appropriately and have conversations about timing of birth, and to also really drive the change about ensuring that we're reviewing those morphology scans and following up if there is not a documented cervical length. So all of those things take time. They're the everydayness, and that's what our midwives are doing that are on the ground.
Have you got targets and a time frame of when you need to achieve them?
Yes, so the overarching target is to reduce preterm birth by 20% by 2024, which is no easy feat. There are sites across the country that have achieved that already. So obviously Western Australia is flying the flag here for us by achieving that goal. So we're all striving to do that, of course, across the nation. But there are many subsets of the strategies that we're working towards. So there will be things like trying to ensure that we reach a month on month that we're reaching our midwifery and medical staff to ensure that they are aware of the collaborative, that they're aware of our objectives, that they're aware of the 7 strategies, and that they're doing everything they can to implement them into their care.
The 7 strategies to safely lower the rate of preterm birth are to prolong pregnancy to 39 weeks where it is safe for mother and baby, to measure the length of the cervix at all mid-pregnancy scans, to use natural vaginal progesterone if the length of the cervix is less than 25 millimetres, to consider a cervical cerclage if the length of the cervix continues to shorten, to use vaginal progesterone if there is a history of spontaneous preterm birth, to identify and offer quitline support to women who smoke, and to offer continuity of care from a known midwife during pregnancy where possible.
What's the key to the success and having everybody adopt these strategies?
Yeah, so I think one big part of the strategy is talking about timing of birth. So we know that the brain development in those last few weeks of pregnancy has direct impacts on numeracy and literacy outcomes for babies, which impacts through to childhood and adulthood and our community. So timing of birth conversations are very important and a big part of the collaborative. Now, that's a big change in practice for us in obstetric and maternity services. So,
and just to clarify, the collaborative aims to reduce by 20% preterm birth and early term birth, don't they? So that every week counts. What you're talking about, this change of practice, is in that early term birth, isn't it?
Yes, 37 to 39 weeks. So historically in obstetrics and midwifery practice, term used to be 37 weeks, and we had lots of policies and procedures and practice and culture to support that. So that's a big change for us that's happened over the last 5 or so years as well. So very pleased to say that we have had a big impact in timing of birth discussions with the Every Week Counts campaign, and starting to see some real practice change. And that doesn't come easily. That comes with a lot of education, a lot of drive, a lot of support from our obstetric colleagues and our midwifery colleagues about also making sure that we're having really meaningful conversations with our women about what their plans are for timing of birth.
And to be clear, we're talking about timing of birth where there's no obstetric or medical indication, aren't we?
Yes. So having a baby over 39 weeks is not appropriate in all cases. This needs to be a women-centred discussion and decision-making, because there are lots of variables that can contribute to the decision-making around timing of birth, and we must not do harm. So these are decisions made very carefully in partnership with the women about, is there any medical and obstetric reasons why we shouldn't prolong pregnancy to 39 weeks. So they're very carefully considered and planned. But we know that if there are no medical or obstetric reasons, prolonging pregnancy and planning a birth after 39 weeks has huge benefits for the mother, for the baby, for the dyad, for the family, in all sorts of ways. So increasing breastfeeding rates, increasing outcomes for babies, reducing the incidence of babies being admitted to our neonatal intensive care units. So the flow-on effects have huge impacts, but it's a big change in practice. Women can feel very concerned about that. So we need to make sure that we're being very carefully considered. We're looking at our balancing measures. We know that every week that the pregnancy continues, there is a small risk of an increase in stillbirth. So we need to take all of those things into consideration. So it might not be appropriate to prolong pregnancy after 39 weeks if a mother has experienced a previous pregnancy loss, for example. So it's it is a big change, but we're starting to see the benefits and certainly putting lots of things in place with our obstetric and our midwifery team.
You mentioned before about WA having already achieved that 20% reduction in preterm birth rate, which is incredible. Why have they been able to achieve that, and can that actually be achieved nationally?
They were the first state to step out, so they've been doing it for a lot longer than what we have, so that's a huge advantage for them. So they were the pilot site when they looked at the strategies in the Preterm Birth Prevention Alliance. They've got a very committed team. They're actually quite outstanding. If you think about the location of the population around Western Australia and the remoteness of that population, they have been very clever in how they've been able to intervene early for women that are at risk of preterm birth and graduate them out of those intensive surveillance care models back to their place of residence so they have a known care provider. Because we don't want mothers sitting, high-risk mothers that are, have an increased risk of preterm birth, sitting in metropolitan areas away from their families for long periods of time.
So you think continuity of care would be the key strategy that gave them success?
Absolutely. So intervene early, surveillance, assessment, intervention, really put those things in place. We know that if we can really maintain that pregnancy and put those interventions in and get women past 28 weeks gestation, the risk of preterm birth starts to decrease rapidly from that point. So it's all about early intervention, and particularly in those states. And Queensland, we are not, we have lots of parallels with Western Australia and the remoteness of our state and accessibility to tertiary hospitals for our women.
Because it's quite interesting that we're coming here from Mater Mothers, which is the biggest maternity hospital in Australia. Obviously, our parameters are very different from someone working in rural and regional places. How would the strategies differ? How could clinicians that don't have access to the resources that we do implement the collaborative?
So it's really interesting and humbling when we come together as a nation, because there are some hospitals that might have 4 midwives. I'm actually a little bit envious of them, because when you do change management with 4 people, you usually have 100% success, where here we are with the collaborative with such a large workforce here at Mater Mothers Hospital. We have over 1,000 midwives. So, and we're on 24-hour shifts and part-time workforce. So we have to be continually driving the message and continually providing education and continuing to have that communication. So that's why having the right team is so important. So the small sites do that extremely well. They realise their vulnerabilities. They might not have access to an ultrasonographer or a radiologist. So they're mobilising patients into tertiary hospitals to have these surveillance and tests and assessment. I think they need to have very strong communication lines with their closest tertiary hospitals. They need to have strong GP communities and strong midwives that are well versed in the strategies of the collaborative. That I think that's why the collaborative is so clever, because not only do we meet face to face, but we have monthly meetings as well. There's also a QI dashboard as well, where we're able to demonstrate our data and compare with all of the other states every month as well, and really do some brainstorming on those calls and within that dashboard as well to pick up some ideas about what everyone else is doing. So they're not alone.
Yeah, there's certainly challenges in some of those areas, particularly with the early term birth stuff. They may only have one induction list or one Caesar list. Yes. So how do you titrate that? The challenges that we don't have.
Yeah, being so resource heavy here, we've got capacity to really drive change around the timing of birth, because we do have capacity to have caesarean sections 7 days a week and induction of labour. But those decisions get harder when you go out to rural areas, because with one Caesar list a week, you can choose to have a baby at 38 weeks or 39 weeks, and we know that week makes a huge difference to outcomes. So they've had to be really clever about that and really throw everything out and analysis and look at their practices and think about how they can challenge routines.
Yeah.
Is a big part of it. Yeah.
There is an increased likelihood of preterm birth for babies born to mothers residing in more remote areas, 13% in very remote areas compared with 8% in major cities.
So in an ideal world, Kathleen, we achieve that 20% reduction. What does that mean for the healthcare sector and hospitals more broadly across the country?
I was doing some reading yesterday, actually. The WHO have just released a statement about the global preterm birth. We know that 1 in 10 babies is born preterm. We also know that one of those babies is dying every 40 seconds globally. So, this is really important work and we are really driving change here. So it's not just about if and when we achieve it, it's how we sustain that. So it is very important, and I think we just need to keep going and concentrate on what we're doing. We know that there's a huge cost. We're talking about something in the vicinity of over $14 billion cost to the health, to our federal government in preterm birth, and also the impacts to our family. Separating that dyad, having a baby in the nursery, extreme term birth babies that are born can spend over 100 days in our neonatal intensive care units. So they're away from their families. They might not live in Brisbane. They're not going home for a long time. They're separated from their other children. It's just the roll-on effect of that impact to their well-being, to their ongoing life. So we want to do everything we can to try and reduce that risk.
It sounds like we're doing some amazing work here in Australia with the collaborative. How would that maybe affect globally? Can we help the global figures that you talked about? Can they?
I hope so. I hope so. I think that's why these collaboratives are so important, because there's those gold nuggets that come out that, if we do this intervention, we actually see a reduction, and we're seeing that here. So it's so pleasing to start seeing that slight drop. So we've seen a 2% reduction in our preterm birth, and we've seen a 4% reduction in our late preterm birth rates, which is really excellent. So it's so good to see that by challenging policy practices, driving change, you do get there bit by bit. And so I think we just need to keep going. 20% is a big ask, particularly for us. We're in a tertiary hospital. We see a lot of high-risk patients. We have a lot of patients that are transferred in from around the state and New South Wales that need to be here because we've got capacity to care for those families. But it will be difficult for us to achieve that, but certainly very pleased that we're starting to see some reduction already, and it's early days.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. It is absolutely fascinating work that you're doing with the collaborative. Great work. Before we go, though,
I'd like to introduce you to a little segment we call the checkup.
So this is about getting to know Kathleen, the medical professional, as well as Kathleen, the person. So Catherine's going to ask you 5 quick questions. Are you up for it?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. Away we go.
Okay, question 1. What TV show best portrays your profession?
What's that crazy one on the UK TV?
Call the Midwife.
No.
One born every minute.
One born every minute, probably.
Yes, that's pretty real. It's pretty real, isn't it? It's really good. If you had a day off today, what would you do?
I would love to stay at home, wave my children off as they walk down the driveway off to school. Would be lovely.
We can't have it all, can we?
I know.
And then what?
And do the groceries. And
No. Put your feet up.
Probably go for a nice massage or a nice walk with my border collie today.
Lovely. Who do you admire?
I would have to say Jeanette Young. I think she's just been so influential in her role through COVID, and I just think that she led us through that such a difficult and challenging time with grace and calmness, and she's a wonderful woman. Yeah.
What was your first concert?
I went to see Johnny Farnham at the My Music Bowl on my own when I was 16.
Adventurous. If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
I'd be the star on a Broadway show.
You're so good. Kathleen has an exquisite singing voice.
A beautiful way to end with the star, Kathleen. Thank you so much for joining us on sMater.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Now, for our listeners at home or in the car or having a well-deserved break between patients, thank you for tuning in.
Please join us for our next episode, where we gain valuable insights from one of our martyr mothers who experienced a preterm birth.
See you next time on sMater.